Welcome to 20th Century Stories. Tonight we travel to Fastnet Rock, Ireland in 1912. Shipping lanes crowd the horizon with mail steamers and new ocean liners. Ice reports pass by wireless as shipyards launch bigger hulls each season. The wider world moves in headlines, while here the hours pass in small, careful acts. Before we begin, settle in. Find a comfortable place. Let your breathing slow. This is your time to drift from the day, to ease into sleep at your own pace. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you can subscribe to 20th Century Stories. So another story is always waiting. The Lighthouse holds the headland like a steady thought. Granite courses climb out of winter spray. The lantern room rides high over kelp and black rock and a wash of foam that never tires. Brass rails glow where cloth has passed, glass panes. Fog and clear in the salt breath, a great lens waits with its prisms cold and perfect. The clockwork weight sleeps on its chain beside the iron ladder. A logbook lies open on the oak table with a pencil laid true along the margin. Below, the galley keeps a small heat against the stone. The tea tin carries its mild comfort. Tied charts lie folded under a shell paperweight. An aneroid barometer rests in its brass ring, needle steady. The spyglass leans on the sill where the keeper set it after the noon watch. The sea holds long swells under a sky the color of pewter. Gulls ride the wind in narrow arcs and complain. Softly to themselves he moved through the rooms with the patience of someone who knows that light is a craft. The great lamp is cool enough to touch. The wick cutter rests on its hook. The lens cloth is folded into a square as neat as a letter. He checks the fuel canister, the funnel, the spare mantle, the match tin that stays wrapped in waxed paper against the damp. A fog bell hangs in its cradle below, and the diaphone waits. Quiet beside its tank, I climb to the lantern and stand a moment with my palm on the brass door. The panes cloud and clear with my breath. The sea turns slate by degrees. Somewhere to the south, a coal trail marks a liner bound for Queenstown. To lift the mails, I trim the wick to a clean crown and rake away the char. A little tulip a shade lower than last night to save paraffin on a hard blow. I ease the lamp glass up and wipe inside with a soft cloth. Prisms catching a milk of light and handing it back as 1,000 small suns. The clockwork wants its measured turns. I wind the drum until the weight kisses its stop, chain links clicking in a calm rhythm that soothes the hands. The regulator fan is touched with a finger, so it begins with a modest sway. I test the float in the oil pot and mark the level on the slip that lives beneath the door latch. The lens carriage glides once, then settles. The room holds its hush like a church without anyone saying so. In the lee of the lantern, the spyglass brings the horizon near. A black stack and a white wake, a three-funneled ship on the westbound track, steady and high. Perhaps from Southampton, with steerage crowded and postcard decks shining under rugs and coats, I set her bearing against. The penciled arcs scratched years ago on the brass sill. Wind east by north, swell from the northwest, light hazing. In the last hour before dusk, down the stair, I light the little oil lamp on the desk and steady the logbook with my wrist. Entries fall in a tidy hand, wind and weather, barometer and tide. One note on the growth along the glazing, put off until spring. One on the paint, to be ordered for the bell frame from the depot. I scan the Admiralty notice that mentions drift, ice, sighted well out on the Grand Banks. and a reminder to keep the fog signal ready. When banks creep in upon the coast, the world sends its larger breath, and here it becomes a small line that lives. Quietly on the page, tea moves into the mug and softens the throat. The galley holds a pan of biscuits wrapped in paper, a slice of salt pork put aside for later. Salt flecks the sill where the last squall came up as a white hand and left without apology. I hook the storm shutter on the windward pane and listen. The surf speaks the same language it used when I first climbed this stair. A tongue of foam lays itself around the rock and draws back. Another follows with the same patience. Dusk begins its slow work. I bring the lamp to life with a single match, and the flame takes the wick without temper. A calm heart in a crystal cage. The lens gives it room and turns, so the sea receives strength and cadence. Beams walk the horizon with their measured stride. A pulse for each minute, and again. Somewhere a trawler reads this as a friend's hand, waving from shore. Somewhere a bridge officer notes our character on a card and breathes easier. The weight drops a link and the fan answers steady as breath. I draw the velvet hood along the glass to catch any film the sea lays down. I turn the small key that tests the fog air and count the beats. The diaphone speaks once, and the sound folds itself into the weather. The bell frame keeps its iron silence. For now kelp bows and lifts in the dark green below. A star shows in a rent of cloud and hides again. Charts open to the tide for morning. Spring's still a few days off. The flood will make the channel quick and tug harder at the moorings under. The cliff. I pencil a light note about the tender's landing. Better at half tide with the swell as it is. Stores can wait if the sea wishes it. A packet from the service brought talk of new liners in Belfast and a photograph of their ribs rising like cathedrals. All of it belongs to harbors and headlines. Here my work is this flame and the slow breath of brass and glass. I walk the gallery and feel the tower lean in the wind like a tall tree that remembers storms. The rail is cold and true under my hand. The beam slides past me and paints the swell with pale cloth. A cormorant lifts from the outer rock with a wet push of wings. Beyond him, the west is only iron and distance. I count the seconds by the regulator and listen for any note that is not itself. Nothing stray, nothing sharp. Only the turning and the sea answering in its low voice. Back inside the lantern, the heat has built a thin circle on the glass where my cloth has just passed. I polish until the circle clears, and hat brim and wick crown and the far faint light of a steamer all stand inside each other like coins. The lamp breathes, the lens turns, the weight drops another link. I write the time in the log and the small. Remark that light established at dusk without incident. Then I ease the door and let the room hold its glow. Below, the galley welcomes me with its little stove and the kindness of tin cups. I set the kettle again, fold the biscuit and cloth so it stays warm. The service box holds wicks trimmed to measure, a spare mantle, 2 funnels, 1 good brush, a roll of lint to keep the prisms honest. In the corner, a tall coil of bell rope waits. For weather, the pricker rests beside the trimmer, and the scent of paraffin sits in the stone. Like a memory of summer, the night will climb. The clockwork will ask for a hand at the right moment and be answered. Ships will cross the beam and mark it in their ledgers, as if noting a star. I listen to the tower settle and to the diaphone valve ticking as it cools from its test. Then I take the spyglass once more and sweep the east, where mail steamers often appear as a faint ash upon the water. Nothing urgent, only a wide road, a steady light, and work that asks for quiet hands and the habit of care. Night gathers around the lantern like a calm tide. The prism faces take the flame and lay it outward in steady sheets. The drum beneath the carriage turns. With a soft click that keeps time without calling attention to itself, I lean to the service table and trim a narrow thread of char from the wick. The tulip holds its even crown. A whisper from the oil pot says the feed is sure. The float pin sits where the mark and pencil has lived for years. The spyglass waits on the sill. I bring it to the lee pane and find a coal carrier low in the water to the west. Her stack breathes a slow plume that the wind pulls level. I set her bearing against the scratched arcs and note her course with a thumb to the glass. Below, the galley kettle gives a small breath. I pour into a thick mug and rest it near the slate that carries tide and weather. The aneroid needle has edged down a hair since afternoon. Wind has freshened by a point. Sea holds the long heave that winter keeps in store. I polish the brass ring around the service door with the square of soft rag kept in a tin. The cloth lifts a thin film and leaves a warm glow. Prisms return 100 tiny suns that turn to a single beam as they pass into the night. The lens feels less like glass and more like a living clock. On the gallery, the air smells of kelp and rope. Gulls have left the outer skerries to the black cormorants. A line of foam moves against the low reef and breaks in small hands of white. Far out, a faint beat from a screw carries like a pulse through wood, stone, skin. I wind the clockwork until the weight kisses its iron stop. Chain links speak in an even clatter that comforts the ribs. A touch to the governor fan brings it to a modest dance. Nothing hurried. The light must walk the horizon at its pledged pace. The log receives its evening line. Flame established after. Dusk, rotation true. Wind east by north with a salt bite. Visibility far with haze toward the banks. Remarks kept plain so the page reads like a chart a tired mind can follow. A packet of notices from the service lies open under the paperweight. Talk of ice drift on the transatlantic lanes and of new hulls fitting out for spring sailings. Olympic already a name and cabins and postcards. Titanic spoken of on every pier. Though many have yet to see her lines at sea, here those words arrive as a reminder to keep the horn ready should banks creep down on our coast. I test the diaphone with a cautious pull on the air. One note moves over the headland and is taken by wind and water. The bell frame remains iron and still. I mark the hour on a slip tucked under the valve key. The horn must not be begged from sleep in weather. It must rise like second nature. Down the stair I pass the weight case and feel the chain's faint tremor through the boot. Below in the service room the funnel sits in its hoop, and the spare wicks lie wrapped in waxed paper. Paraffin tins stand in a neat row with brass caps turned home by a steady hand. The tide chart opens to a neat set of curves. I run a finger along the evening ebb and the morning flood. The tender will have an easier landing if the swell keeps from the northwest. Stores can wait for a kinder day. The sea is a parton, and not to be argued with. A small repair asks for attention. The trimmer blade shows a burr along its edge. I take the stone from its sleeve and dress the metal with slow passes. The edge returns to true. The cutter will Tick jar like a violin takes a note. Tea warms the chest. The mug leaves a pale ring on the oak that the cloth removes with a single circle. Simple acts put the room back in order. The tower's heart beats evenly again. The lantern breathes. A little more heat. I raise the glass and wipe the inner ring where the night leaves a film. Prisms clear with a soft squeak. The flame sits low and patient. The carriage glides another tooth along the brass. Each movement so small and exact that time itself feels kinder. The spyglass draws a cutter nearer. A single riding light bows. In the swell, she lifts and falls on the edge of the beam, and then becomes a darker shadow among many. I listen for a whistle, and hear only the long breath of water on rock. Across the horizon, a dim smear may be a westbound steamer changing watch. Wireless has made such traffic a speaking world. Marconi sparks cross the night like invisible birds. Here our answer remains this measured light and a note in the book. Wind climbs the tower by inches. The gallery rail turns cold under the palm and keeps its truth. A beam lays a pale road across the water and breaks it into silver threads. I count in the head the seconds of a revolution and find them right where they should be. In the service room, I set a small pan on the stove for a slice of pork and a heel of bread. The smell sits low and friendly in the stone. The knife makes clean work. The tin plate warms the fingers. Simple food for a craft that asks for long attention rather than hurry. The wick takes a breath and asks for nothing. Oil feeds in a steady thread. The float pen marks the level where pencil said it should sit. The lamp is a good companion when treated like a living thing. Cloud opens over the eastern rim and shows a thin belt of starlight. A frost may take the steps before dawn. I set the galley bucket on the third tread where a careless foot might think too fast. In the log, a small word reminds the morning watch to feel for ice on the gallery and to trust the rail. A short hum from the horn tank says the valve is sound and the pressure steady. The key is returned to its peg with a cloth wrapped round, so salt is kept from the threads. The bell rope is coiled and hung a hand's breadth from the floor, so it will not wick damp from stone. I walk the round of the lens with the last polish. Each facet shows a tiny lantern within the larger one. The beam steps outward again and again. A trawler somewhere east will put our character in its night book and steer with an easier heart. The world beyond the headland swells with its own ambitions. More steel, more speed, a pride in length and tonnage. Routes written in bold lines across maps and shipping offices. In this tower, the rules are older and steadier. Fuel kept dry. Wick kept true. Glass kept honest. Time kept with the drop of a weight and the courtesy of a hand that wends when winding is due, mid-watch nears. I draw the stool beside the door where a draft slips under the sill and meets my boots. The lantern throws quiet light across brass and oak. I listen to the small narratives that mean health, the murmur of oil, the hush of the flame, the step of the carriage, the small tremor in the chain, the soft complaint of a hinge that wants a breath of tallow at dawn. The spyglass rests. The mug rests. The log rests open with the pencil laid like a mast along the margin. The sea leans and straightens, and leans again. The beam walks the horizon with its measured stride, and I breathe with the tower while winter deepens outside, letting the work move forward by calm inches toward the hour when the weight will ask for the next careful turn, and the night will carry our light to ships that have never seen this rock, and will trust it all the same. Mid-watch settles over the gallery like a pale shawl. The beam keeps its pledged stride. The chain gives a faint shiver each time the drum yields a tooth. The glass breathes a warm circle where my cloth has just passed, and then clears to crystal again. I lift the service door and touch the wick crown with the tremor. A whisper of char falls into the tin. Oil rises in a thin shore thread from the pot. The float pin sits against a penciled mark that has lived under my thumb for years. The aneroid hangs by the stair with its brass ring cool to the fingers. The needle has crept down a hair since dusk. Winged veers one point and tastes of iron. Kelp thuds softly beyond the spray line, and the stone answers with its old, deep voice. I raise the lee pane and give the lens a careful sweep with the soft. Square, the facets drink the light and hand it outward like folded letters. The carriage glides, the governor fan nods. The lamp breath seems to steady the whole tower. On the gallery the air smells of rope pitch and winter salt. A small flow of foam spins in the eddy below and breaks against the bell frame. Far off a low, steady beat lives in the water. A westbound steamer keeping her watch, her wake laid like a chalk mark under the beam. I take the spyglass and bring the horizon in. A dark stack, a trimmed foremast, 3 lamps carried true. I set her angle against the scratched arcs on the sill, west by south with the heave under her quarter. Risk is not a thought for me or her, while the prism keeps its promise. Back inside the lantern, the warmth has a mild sweetness of clean paraffin. The service tray shows the cutter, the pricker, the spare mantle wrapped in waxed paper, the tiny file I use to ease a burr, all in their outlines. Order is a kind of light that saves the mind from wandering. I wind the clockwork with both hands and listen for the chain to kiss its stop. Links tick like beads, the weight rests well. I breathe with the fan for a count and feel the pace settle to its gentle course. Below, the oak table holds the tide curves for morning. The flood will tug hard at the tender's mooring if wind keeps northerly. I write a neat line to warn the boatman when he comes. Better to have safer hands and fewer words. A packet from the service carries notices of ice farther west. Masters advised by wireless from Cape Race and the banks. Lights to maintain. Their horns and bells at the first smell of banks. I touch the diaphone key with a cautious hand. One note rolls over rock and water and returns as a feeling in the ribs. In the galley, a kettle hums like a little engine. Tea steadies the breath. I cut a heel of bread and the slice of pork I saved. The tin warms my palms. The stove blue holds low and clean, a faithful cousin to the lamp above. The tower leans a whisper with each gust and remembers who built it. Granite courses set like psalm lines. Iron ladders trued with rivets that want only a cloth and a dab of tallow. I run a finger under a hinge that asked for notice at dusk and promise it a breath of grease at dawn. Prisms pick a star through a ragged hole in cloud. The beam walks past it and sews the sea to the sky, stitch by stitch. I count the revolution by heart and test it with the small seconds watch I keep in my vest. The two agree as old friends do, without ceremony. A trawler to the east shows a low red glow at her funnel mouth. Her deck lamps blink as men move nets. I turn the log a page and add their bearing for the hour. Wind and sea and visibility in a tidy hand. remarks plain. Nothing in them that could worry a tired reader. Macro breath belongs to the shipping lanes. Tonight, Royal Mail schedules kept to the minute. Emigrant berths sold out to spring. Shipyards raising ribs like cathedrals and slipping hulls into water with brass bands and flags. Here I keep a single flame trimmed to a covenant of arcs and seconds. A promise as old as these stones. I test the oil level in the service pot with a slender dip. Wipe the thread on the rag and note a finger's breadth above the line I prefer. For midnight, frugality and sufficiency share a handshake in this room. The sea will sign their names when fog comes down like wool. The horn tank sits under its cloth. I lay my palm to its skin and feel the pressure sure. The valve key rests. In its peg with threads greased, the bell rope coils just clear of the floor so damp cannot climb. Readiness is only a quiet posture repeated. I step out to the lee of the gallery and listen. Surf writes steady sentences on the skerries. The wind shifts and returns. The rock says yes to both and endures. The beam sweeps the heave, and every sweep feels like a breath laid upon a sleeping. Brow back at the lantern I polish, where warmth has drawn its ring. The glass clears until I can see wick, crown, and star and faint stack, smoke all nested together. The lens turns. The chain murmurs. The keeper in me rests easier when metal replies like this. The stool by the door welcomes me again. I set the mug on the notch worn into oak by other mugs. I hold the pencil and wait for the next small thing that merits a line. I flutter in the flame that wants a touch, a tremor in the drum that wants a turn, a thought from the sea that asks to be written. Simply toward the second watch, a thin frost begins to silver the iron steps outside. I chalk a reminder for the morning round. Hand on the rail, boots careful. No haste where breadth of light meets. Narrow tread. Kindness begins with a note left in the right place. A breath of fog lives low to the south and keeps its distance. The horn remains asleep. I count the beats of the regulator to the end of the scale and back. All steady. The lens sings its faint glass song, and the night accepts the answer. I take the spyglass one last time and sweep the west. Nothing near but the slow, confident steamers walking their straight lines. I lift my hand to the lens as if to bless. The flame and it answers by holding its quiet crown. Down the stair, I close the galley shutter and bank the stove. The kettle sits with its small pride of work done. The table keeps tide and weather under the shell paperweight. The log lies open to the hour that waits. Pencil laid true like a mast. The tower hums in its own key. Stone, brass, oil, water, all in accord. I let the room be its own company, and I become its witness again. The beam moves on. The sea breathes back, and the night leans toward dawn by steady inches, asking nothing more from me than the next careful turn and the same quiet care that kept every ship's card honest when it wrote our light by name. The small hours thin the dark to a softer blue, frost silvering the iron treads, while the lantern keeps its slow heart. The beam stepping the horizon with the calm gait of a practiced walker. I lift the service door and trim a breath from the wick. Crown, char falls like ash into the tin. The tulip holds an even rim. Oil threads upward in a steady line. The float pin sits true against the penciled mark I trust. A sweep of the soft square clears the inner ring of glass. where warmth leaves its faint circle. Prisms brighten in quiet answer. The carriage glides a tooth along the drum. The governor. Fan makes its small, courteous bow. On the gallery, the wind has found a new edge. Kelp slaps the low reef and withdraws. The rail is cold as a coin and sure as a rule. The beam lays a pale road over the heave and gathers it back again. I take the spyglass, and the west comes near. A black stack and a straight wake show a liner, holding her lane with the confidence of a timetable. 3 decks of lamps like a city in miniature. Her bows lift and settle as if nodding to our light. A note goes in the log with a hand that neither hurries nor decorates. Bearing taken. Visibility long to the west, with a milk to the south. Wind veering a point and tasting of iron. Tide easing. Toward slack before dawn, the aneroid speaks in the smallest motion. Needle slipped another hair. I touch the brass ring and feel the cool of weather in it. I pencil a line to review the horn at gray light if the milk thickens toward the headland. Below, the galley keeps a quiet glow. Kettle set back to a murmur. Tin cup on the notch, worn into oak by many hands. A heel of bread wrapped in cloth against the damp. The stove's blue cousin to the flame above. Macro talk moves through the notices left under the shell paperweight. Wireless relays ice across the western lanes. Shipyards raise steel ribs faster than stories can keep up. Passengers step aboard. With music on the quay, while keepers along this coast wind drums and polish glass, and make ready the fog keys in case banks come down like wool. I lift the valve key from its peg and give the diaphone one cautious breath. A single low note travels the stone and enters the water. The sound returns to my ribs like a slow hand. The key goes home with threads greased and a cloth folded round. A bell hammer waits oiled beside its frame. Coil of rope hung a hands. Breadth clear of the floor so damp cannot climb. Iron kept honest by small habits that outlast storms. The clockwork asks for its turns. Chain rises. Weight kisses the stop. Links clatter in a rhythm the bones learn to trust. I test the fan with a fingertip and feel the pace settle into its pledged measure. I walk the narrow gallery with a lanterner's step. The tower leans shade with each gust and returns like a tree that remembers. Foam flashes on the skerries and vanishes. Beyond the beam, the world is simply distance and salt. Inside, the lens breathes a little heat. I wipe where breath has drawn a faint ring and the glass becomes winter night again. Flame steady, crown clean, courage sure. The small language of health spoken without flourish. The tide chart shows a generous flood for the tender if the wind shows mercy. Better the half when swell sets from the northwest. I leave a penciled circle on the curve as a kindness to the boatman who reads seas as I read glass. A dull scrape along the trimmer blade earns a minute at the stone. Metal returns to sharp with slow passes. The cutter will take char without tearing. Good edges make quiet work. The spyglass finds a trawler lying to her gear. Deck lamps blink and go dark. She settles like a resting bird at the beam's edge. I hold her in the circle a breath longer and then stand the glass down. The log receives another even line. Rotation true, flame steady, weather as before. Ice, reports noted, remarks plain. A page that will make sense to someone who has been cold and waked too early. I check the spare wick lengths rolled like sailors' hammocks in waxed paper, each marked by a thumb's width for the cutter. fuel tins with brass caps seated and edges wiped. The small army that keeps one flame an honest citizen of the coast. A thread of fog slides up from the south and then thins. I watch the headland, to leeward where mist likes to take a hold. The horn can sleep a while yet. The bell will bide its time. Only the surf is speaking, and it says what it always says. Macro breath turns to quiet again. A westbound mail steamer somewhere under our Ark writes our character by number in a bridge book and goes on with her night. Emigrant cabins warm with stories that guess at coasts they have not seen. Stokers feed their iron under red light while up here one keeper tends brass and glass and time. The lantern glass asks once more for the soft square. A small crescent of haze disappears under the cloth. Prisms show a star like a pin held between finger and thumb. The beam moves past and carries it seaward. I wind the drum a last time before gray light. The chain hums. The weight rests. The governor fan nods at the pace I know by heart. No rush in this craft, only the exact repetition of right acts. On the stair, a rind of frost has taken 2 treads. I scatter sand from the galley jar and chalk a line on the slate for the morning round. Hand to rail. The tower keeps its men as steadfastly as it keeps its light. Tea returns to the mug. Breath falls into the calm of the room. The kettle murmurs. The log lies open with the pencil laid like a mast. The spyglass rests by the sill. The lens turns a measured arc that stitches sea to sky. A faint seam opens along the eastern rim. Not dawn, only the thought of it. The water beyond the skerries takes a softer shine. The wind lets go a degree. The lantern's warmth becomes a circle that the hands remember when they go out to the rail. I press a thumb to the meniscus and tap the rim. Water line true between marks, the oil feeds steady. The float pin where it ought to sit. Numbers that quiet the mind as surely as a prayer said, well, I ease the service door shut. Cloth returns to its tin. Trimmer and pricker take their places. The weight lowers a thoughtful link. The beam keeps walking its calm road. And I wait with the tower on the edge of the long gray that comes before daylight, ready for the horn if the south breath thickens, ready for the tender if the swell keeps modest, ready for the next small act that keeps it coast alive toward the small hours. The wind lays out its long threads, and the tower answers with a steadier lean. The beam keeps its cadence across the dark as if counting the breaths of the sea. The chain murmurs where the weight gives a link and rests. I lift the service door and take a careful touch from the wick crown. Char falls in a thin curl to the tin. Oil rises in the narrow feed, as though drawn by thought alone. The flame sits round and quiet. The float pin holds to the penciled mark that has guided many winters. The lens faces ask for gentleness. I breathe on the inner ring and chase the faint film with chamois kept in a clean fold. Prisms return to cold clarity and throw the lamp outward as orderly sheets. The carriage slides a tooth. The governor fan nods like a head patient with time. On the gallery, the iron steps carry a silver dust of frost. Boot soles listen before they trust. My hand keeps the rail where it is truest. The air smells of rope tar and kelp pressed beneath. Tide. The surf writes its rolling sentence on the outer reef and begins it again. Across the west, a low smear becomes a steamer when the spyglass brings her near. Stacked modest bridge lamps set like small moons. She walks the transatlantic track with confidence born of schedules and wireless watch. I set her bearing against the scratched arcs and note west by south with a swell under her quarter. The barometer needle has edged lower by the width of a hair. Wind tastes of iron filings and distance. I note the change in the book with a steady hand and right fog possible. Before dawn on a line that a tired mind can believe and obey, a bell rope waits in its coil, with strand laid left and right like a sleeping braid. The diaphone tank takes my palm and answers with a sure warmth. The test key rests in its peg wrapped against salt. Readiness kept in posture rather than display. At the service table, the trimmer blade shows bright after stone and oil. The pricker sits where a fingertip can find it without search. The funnel's lip is wiped to honesty, so every filling remains clean. The tins stand in their neat row, brass caps home and dry. Macro breath moves just beyond the horizon. Mail beats kept, too. The minute, emigrant berths promised by spring. Greyhounds of the Atlantic lengthened by each season's pride. A web of sparks crossing night from ship to shore and back again. Here the reply remains a covenant of light and time and care. I wind the drum until the chain kisses its stop. Links click like beads on a rosary. The weight settles to its long fall. I touch the fan and feel the pace return to the pledged stride. One revolution counted under the thumb, another trusted to the ear. In the galley, the small stove keeps blue as a forget-me-not. Tea warms a glove and then the ribs. A heel of bread and a slice left from earlier make a spare kindness. The cup leaves a faint ring on the oak that the cloth erases with one slow circle. The tender's landing is penciled for the half-tide, if weather smiles. Stores stand marked in a hand that wastes no word. Whiting for the glass, tallow for the ladders, wicks from the depot to replace those cut lean by thrifty weeks. Paint for the bell frame saved for a brighter season. I walk the watch once more, around the lens and over the gallery. The beam combs the dark water and draws a pale stitch across the heave. A red spark low to the east says trawler with nets busy. Their lamps blink like insects caught in a jar. The tower gives them a sure edge to the world and asks for nothing in return. A breath of fog creeps low from the south and samples the cliff without boldness. I open the horn for a single note that goes out like a steady hand laid upon a brow. One long syllable, and silence again. The valve key returns to its peg with threads clean and willing. The lantern warms the glass in a thin ring. Chamois passes. Clarity returns. The flame keeps its round heart. The prisms multiply it into law. The carriage steps and the drum agrees. Order is a piece one builds and tends. I set the seconds watch to the regulator card and listen to the fan's gentle counting. The numbers sit where they should, a small reassurance placed like a folded blanket at a sleeping shoulder. The kind of check no one will praise and everyone depends upon. Far off a liner shows her stacked lamps along a clean horizon. I cannot read her name, but I know the route she keeps, mails aboard. Passengers walking late on warm decks with coats turned, up and collars high. A band perhaps still finding notes in a saloon. All of that far beyond this rock. Here a single lamp keeps its quiet covenant, and the world grows simpler and kinder for the ships that see it. Toward false dawn, the wind softens and turns a point. Frost thickens on the weather side like breath made visible. I chalk a word for the morning round. Mind the step where shadow hangs under the upper landing. Kindness begins with a note set in the right place. The weight falls another bead's length. The chain tells its soft story. I give the drum a measured wind until the kiss returns. The fan takes its modest dance. The flame accepts a touch from the trimmer. Char whispers into the tin. Oil glides up like a thought remembered. The book receives a line without flourish. Light maintained. Rotation true. Barometer falling a hair. Fog tested. Visibility fair to the west. Remarks plain and forgiving. A page another keeper could read at a glance and trust. Cloud parts over the eastern pane and gives a thin ladder of stars. The sea. Below shows dark shoulders with threads of light in their seams. I breathe with the tower and feel the granite answer through the soles. Stone and brass and oil and glass agreeing without argument. The horn key waits. The bell sleeps. The gallery. Rail takes a film of white that prints the palm. I wipe the pane's edge where warmth makes a circle. The lens clears to crystal and lays its sheets outward again. The beam finds the same old marks, and they find it. Dawn will come in slow iron light. Before that, I pass once more through the Jan, rooms that hold this weather inside. The service table set to its outlines, the tins dry and capped, the rope coiled, the stove banked, the spyglass ready at the lee pane. The tower breathing like a living thing that trusts its keeper and gives its strength to the world without ever needing to be seen up close. False dawn lifts as a faint wash along the eastern rim. The tower answers with a quieter lean, and the beam keeps its measured stride without asking for praise. I take the soft chamois once more to the inner ring. Warmth has drawn a thin circle where breath met glass. The cloth clears it to crystal, and the facets hand the lamp outward as ordered. Sheets, the drum speaks in its calm beads. A single click, and then ease. The chain gives a little tremor felt through the boot of the weight case. The governor fan nods with the patience of someone counting knit stitches. On the gallery, the frost has grown to a silver whisker along the rail. Palm prints show as pale. Ovals where the hand rests and lifts. Boot soles find their truth by listening before they trust. A swell from the northwest moves the kelp beds with a low, dark shine. The bell frame keeps its iron quiet. The diaphone tank sits with its sure warmth under cloth. I lay a palm there and feel a tempered readiness like a horse standing in traces. The spyglass gathers a mail steamer to the west. 3 fungs set. Like chimneys on a tidy street, lamps carried true. She holds the transatlantic track as if it were a road laid in chalk across open water. I mark her angle against the scratched arcs and write west by south, making a neat note of her time on our horizon. The aneroid needle has fallen another whisper. The book receives it. Wind veering a point and air thickening low over the headland. Fog a possibility before sunrise. Horn to be ready at the first drift that dims our reach. Below, the galley blue keeps to a quiet thread. Tea wakes the chest and hands. A heel of bread warmed on the stove shares its small mercy. The cup leaves a ring the cloth removes with a single slow circle. Order restored where habit touches wood and brass. I dress the trimmer on the stone and set its edge straight. As a hymnal line, The pricker returns to its place by memory rather than sight. The funnel lip is wiped honest, so the next filling remains a clean act that wastes nothing. The lens turns on its track, so lightly I can slow it with a finger, and then let it take its own pace again. Some speak of mercury baths under such glass. In newer towers, ours walks a brass foot with grace enough, macro breath moved far beyond the rock. Wireless spark running messages from Cape Race to ship bridges under hard starlight. Steel ribs growing in Belfast sheds, while agents sell spring. Berths to families with trunks and hopeful coats. Our reply remains a covenant of arcs and seconds, a beam written in water and air that keeps strangers within the safety of a coastline they may never see. The horn key takes a cautious pull. One long syllable goes out and finds the cliff and returns through stone and ribs as a quiet assurance. The valve threads are greased, and the key returns to its peg wrapped against salt. I wind the drum until the chain kisses its stop. Beads of iron speak in a tidy clatter, then rest. The fan. Breath keeps time with the small seconds card. One revolution measured by ear and by thumb both. On the lee side I polish where heat draws its ring and watch the flame keep a low crown. Oil rises in the narrow feed like a thought remembered. The float pin holds to the pencil line that has outlived 2 coats of paint. A trawler's red spark to the east blinks, then steadies. Nets hauled in and men in oilskins moving as dark knots of motion. I set their bearing in the margin because it pleases me to keep the night's small commerce. Honest, the tide chart says half flood at the hour when the tender prefers to try the landing. Swell as it is, we will make do tomorrow or the next day. Stores can wait. There is paraffin enough and wicks boxed tight under waxed paper. Paint for the bell frame saved for a dry window and a bit of red lead. When spring allows, the tower breathes. Granite set upon granite, iron ladder carrying weight and habit. I run a thumb under the hinge that asked for kindness and promise it tallow when daylight comes. Small courtesies make large structures gentle. Fog begins as a soft blur along the sea. South, not heavy, only a gauze the beam can stitch through. I count the regulator to its last mark and back. The horn gives one more plain note and sleeps. The bell remains a thought set in iron for weather of another sort. The seconds watch in my vest clicks where it should. The lens makes its slow hymn. The chain tells the same story as an hour ago and will again. This steadiness is the whole craft, dressed in brass and glass. Light gathers as a gray thread behind the cloud. The night thins without decision. I lift the service door and give the wick crown one last clean touch. Char falls like a black petal to the tin. The flame rounds and holds. I walk the gallery. To look at the steps, frost films the weather side. A chalkword on the inner post will greet the day watch. Mind the upper tread, hand to the rail, no haste. Kindness begins with notes left in the right places. Down the stair the oak table holds. Tide and wind and the small shell that keeps the paper from wandering. The log lies open to the hour that will see the lamp eased and the room set for day. True dawn lifts slow as pewter poured thin. The beam keeps its promise until the dark no longer needs it. The world turns from needing light to seeing rock. I wait for that exact seam of time when night work yields to day habit. I close the service door a moment and stand with the tower. Flame steady, lens clean, drum content, horn ready. Bell quiet, log honest. A craft made of measures and care, and a patience that spreads into the bones. When the East has enough color to carry ships by sight, I will lower the flame by gentle turns. Snuff with the crown held true, cap lifted without rush, glass wiped where the night breathed, clockwork stopped and weight settled, oil noted to the line. The first act of morning written plain in the book, macro breath will go on outside us. Steel launched into sea lanes, ice spoken of by call sign and mile, postcards posted in saloons that smell of polish and fruit. Here the day watch will climb with a clean rag and a steady hand. They will see the chalk on the post and smile. The horn key will wait with its threads greased. The bell rope will hang clear of the floor, and the lighthouse will keep its ordinary mercy ready for the next night and the next ship and the next quiet turning of the world. True dawn loosens the night from the pains. The seam between sea and sky shows as a slow gray thread. I lower the flame with careful turns until the crown sits like a closing flower. The lens completes its last stately sweep. Then I ease the snuffer down, and the wick answers with a soft ember that fades to nothing. The lamp cools under its guard. Glass raised an inch for breath, prisms mist and clear. I wipe the inner ring with the chamois kept folded in its tin. A breath on the brass shows where the cloth should pass. The carriage rests. The governor fan comes to stillness. The drums, weight stands quiet on its chain. Oil is noted to the line in the book. Paraffin tins checked by heft and by pencil mark. The funnel lip wiped until it shows the shape of light. Spare wicks counted in their waxed wraps. The pricker set where a sleepy hand will find it at dusk. On the gallery the frost prints a pale lace along the rail. I chalk the post for the day watch, hand on the cold side. No haste on the upper tread. Wind carries a faint scent of kelp and rope tar. Gulls peel away from the skerries and complain like old hinges finding morning. The barometer shows it's new, thought by a hair's width. I tap the glass with the back of a finger and write the figure, wind veering a point. Low thickening to the south, fog at our threshold when tide turns. Horn to be kept near in mind and hand. Tide curves spread like stitched cloth across the oak. Flood will lift hard against the landing if the swell keeps its pulse. I pencil a modest note for the tender, best at the half. Stores may wait under a fairer temper. The derrick slings get a glance and a palm pressed to hemp where a splice wants watching. Down in the service room, the little galley keeps a blue thread. Kettle set on for a second cup. Bread warmed against the lid. A tin of black lead waits for the stove skin. Iron answers to the cloth with the patient shine it remembers. The spyglass rests on the sill in its felt sleeve. I carry it to the lee pane and sweep a slow arc. Westbound track clear. Only a coal trail far off and a cutter snug under our shadow. The sea wears long winter muscles. Each rise lays white along the reef and slides away as if counting mackerel. Breath moves beyond the headland in steady news of iron and steam. Shipyards lift new ribs in Belfast sheds. Liners gather crews and crockery and postcards. Wireless taps cross the miles like invisible swallows between Cape stations and bridges at night. Here that weather becomes a small entry and a readiness. Kept in brass and habit, I grease the hinge that asked at midnight. 1 finger's worth of tallow and a closing turn. The squeak forgets itself. Ladders want politeness and repay it with quiet. The door answers with a hinge that belongs to the house again. The bell frame under the gallery takes a glance. Bolts tight. Clapper wrapped for the Kong. Salt has gnawed at one corner of paint and left iron brave to the air. A note made for. The depot's next box, red lead now, top coat. When the day softens, the horn tank sits with a sure warmth under cloth. I ease the bleed of breath and close. Threads kept clean under the paper wrap. Keep pegged where a hand that is not mine will find it without hunting when fog drifts up the slope like wool. Light grows by shades rather than decisions. Rock shoulders step out of gray. The tower's shadow lays itself upon our own galleries. I lift the day's shutter where spray wants to write on the inside of glass. Any drip finds the felt bar and not the lens. Small guards save large labors. The log carries morning lines in a tidy hand. Lamp extinguished at exact time. Rotation 2. Rest. Wick trimmed and boxed. Oil to mark. Barometer falling a hair. Horn tested in night watch. Visibility fair at west. Remarks set like stones in a path that even a weary eye can follow. I make a small round with whiting and soft water. Prisms loved with light circles until the glass forgets the film the night left. The lens stands like a great cathedral window against itself. Sun takes the edges and offers them to the room as quiet rainbows. The gallery mast carries storm cones and oilcloth wraps. I check the lashings in the halyard sheave. No signal for now. Only a flag to dry the morning's mind. Cones and drums will speak when weather tells us first. Until then, they rest like folded words. A letter packet from the last tender waits under the shell paperweight. Printed circulars. A slip about a spare float pin for the service pot. A friendly hand from another station, noting a whale seen 3. Leagues off last week and a slant of aurora that made the lantern blush. Such news rides thin paper and becomes fresh company in a stone room. I touch the regulator fan with 2 fingers and feel the balance. Pivots free, no grit. The little bearing holds its oil as it should. At dusk it will begin its gentle counting again. Now it sleeps like a quiet instrument in a case. Below, the cistern gets its winter check, frost line clear. Stopcock tested and returned. A coil of hose inspected where cloth binding kept salt from its rubber. The pump handle draws with a solid spine, a bucket filled and set by the stair for the lens cloths to rinse. Rope paid out over the derrick head is coiled back with each lay in its home. Splices brushed and looked at as one looks at scars. Honest work that tells the truth even when no one asks. Macro threads keep weaving beyond the horizon. Mail schedules pinned in offices. Emigrant trunks waxed and numbered. A new hole measured. In feet and pride. Reports of barrack ice adrift where warm water meets cold. The banks speaking in fog and star. Our rock answers such tides with a single craft. Light at night, signal in weather, notes made without flourish. Hands steady against brass and glass. The sun clears its low bar and turns the prisms into clear. Stone. I close the service door and the cool lamp and lay the cloth back in its tin. Feet recall the steps without counting. The rail meets the palm with a chill that belongs to clean metal and wind. The day watch climbs from the keepers. Room with a glance at the chalked post. We trade the quiet language of stations. What has turned, what has rested, Where a hinge now remembers its manners, where paint will want red lead, where the tide will be friend or tutor, I pour one last cup and press warmth into the mug for the hand that has just come in from the boat shed. The smell of paraffin and tea and salt makes a house where there is no street. The log waits for another careful line at noon. Charts will ask to be turned. Bearings will go from thought to pencil and back again. I leave the spyglass by the lee pane and the seconds watch beside the card. I hang the oilskin by the door to remember rain. I wind the small wall clock that keeps our days from sliding. The sea lifts and lays and lifts again. Gulls print white on the sky and fold into the weather. The beam is at rest, but its promise is not. Dusk lives ahead as surely as tide and hour. Hands will meet it with wick and cloth and measured turns. For now the tower drinks light like stone drinks heat, and the headland keeps its calm work in view of a world that grows larger beyond the haze. By late morning the headland wears a quiet. Light. Spray lifts in loose veils and falls as fine salt on the lee panes. The tower keeps its calm height while gulls work the slipstream along the wall. I rinse the chamois in a bucket set on the third tread. Salt milk clouds the water and clears. The cloth wrung soft returns to its tin. Prisms hold their clean faces, and the lantern room smells of brass and cool oil. The weight stands easy on its chain. I ease the drum a hand's width to test the pawl. The click answers like a stitch counted in knitting. The governor fan rests with its veins balanced true. Dusk will wake them, and they will remember the pace. We ask on the oak table, the tide curves lie smooth as folded linen. I pencil a neat arrow for the tender at the safer window. Swell from the northwest, still long, better at the half. Derrick rope inspected and the hook greased with tallow before. Hands arrive, the barometer steadies after its small fall. I tap the glass with the back of a finger and write the number in round figures. Wind veers a breath toward east. Haze rides the lower horizon like a gray scarf. Horn readiness kept in mind and near to hand. From the galley a thread of tea rises and softens the chest. Bread warmed on the lid gives a quiet sweetness. The tin cup leaves a ring that the cloth lifts away. Order returns to wood and to thought. I open the storage chest for lamp sundries. Wicks counted within their waxed wraps. Funnels clean and lips wiped honest. The pricker sharp as a needle. A spare float pen folded in paper against rust and damp. The spyglass takes the west and finds a low coal trail. A freighter steady with her stack breathing level. She keeps the ocean road like chalk drawn across slate. I set her angle against. The arcs scratched years ago into the sill and mark her hour in the margin. Macro breath moves in distant offices where agents stamp tickets and ship carpenters compare scantlings. Wireless spark carries ice sighting lists between coastal stations and bridges at sea. Here that weather becomes a chalk note on the board, and a hand kept near the horn key when a white veil climbs the cliffs. I stepped to the gallery and feel the real answer cool and honest, storm cones still wrapped, shrouds snug on their cleats. Paint along the bell frame scuffed by a winter of salt. A small square of sandcloth and a thought of red lead sit on the later list. The cistern room breathes. A stone chill. Stopcock turned and returned. Hose checked where cloth binding guards it from sun and brine. The pump handle comes up with a good spine. bucket filled for Len's claws and for the little scrub the stove will want, a gull drops to the outer reef and walks the weed as if reading. A seal lifts a dark head in a channel where green water runs like glass. The headland keeps its plain company and asks for nothing loud. I take the little alidade from its drawer and place it on the sill. Bearings of inshore marks confirmed for the day when fog will ask more questions than eyes can answer. Card updated in a tidy hand. Pencil laid like a mast beside the log. The fog signal plant gets its check. Air lines traced by palm and ear. Joints wiped with a cloth to feel for whisper. Tank warm under its cover. The bleed eased for a breath and set home. Key pegged where a sleepy hand will not hunt at dusk. At the stair landing, a hinge that squeaked at night now moves in civility. A finger's worth of tallow kept its promise. Iron remembers kindness. The step takes weight without remark. Chalk on the post reminds the next boots to mind the upper tread while frost lingers. I sweep salt grit from the lantern sill with a feather whisk kept in a jar. The sound is a small hush. The panes thank the gentle touch. The sea outside opens and closes its long lungs without haste. A packet left by the last tender waits under the shell paperweight. Circulars about keepers' schools and new lifeboat drills upriver. A friend at a light farther north notes bark bits sighted by fishermen who know summer water and winter water by smell alone. The letter's ink lifts the room like a stove small. Blue, I dress the trimming blade with 2 slow passes on the stone. The edge returns to straight. The cutter sits with the pricker and the soft rag on the service tray, each in its outline, each a quiet promise against the coming night. The derrick head gets a glance. Sheaves turn without complaint. Splice inspected where hemp meets hook. If sea smiles tomorrow, the boat will come in. If not, we keep our own company, and the light will not know the difference. From the lee pane the spyglass finds a cutter snug to our shadow. One lamp at the foremast. A man bends to a coil of rope. Another leans to a tin mug that steams. They glance up when the sun catches glass at our gallery, and then return to their plain tasks. Macro threads keep weaving beyond the horizon. Passengers stroll under rugs on sunny decks. Mail bags sorted to coaches that will chase rails across. Fields when landfall comes. Telegraph keys rattle in depots while the sea holds its ancient grammar. Our reply remains the same, a clean lens, a steady lamp, a horn that speaks without drama when the white weather asks. I polish the service ring until brass carries a soft dawn inside itself. Fingerprints vanish under the cloth. The room takes on that ready look that belongs to ship bridges and engine rooms and places where care is the only ornament. The minutes to noon thin like light through gauze. I note wind and water and the temper of the day. Visibility fair with haze to south. Swell long and even. Tender advised for half tide. Remarks brief enough that a tired eye can trust them. In the galley, the kettle sets up its small engine again. I fold a biscuit in cloth for later. The stove blue holds steady. The smell of paraffin and tea and rope pitch makes a house where there is no street and no neighbor but the sea. The tower asks for nothing more until dusk. Yet there is always one more kindness to place. I cut a strip of felt for the day's shutter, where spray likes to creep along a seam. Tacks tapped with the handle of the knife. The leak that dreamed of itself forgets to begin. I coil the bell rope so the last turn hangs a hand's breadth from the floor. Damp will not climb. fibers will not stiffen. The clapper sleeps inside its frame and waits for weather that belongs. To another sort of night, the second's watch is wound and set against the card by the lantern door. Tiny clicks keep company with the faint breath of the room. Granite in its courses feels lighter when time is kept by honest hands. I close the chest, set the stool where a boot will want it after the first climb at dusk, lay the chamois in its tin and the cloth on the hook, then stand a moment with the tower and let my breath fall to its slow measure. The sea heaves and folds. The headland holds. The day walks forward toward the hour when the wick will lift and the lens will begin its hymn again, and my part will be the same quiet craft, wick and cloth and oil and time, the kind of work that guides strangers through a night I will never see from their decks, and that is enough to keep the hands careful and the heart at rest. Afternoon wears a thin shine upon the panes. Salt dries in faint crystals along the lower rails. The headland keeps its steady hush while the gulls settle into slower arcs along the windward face. I lift the oil stone and give the smallest hinge a careful pass. Tallow worked into the joint with the back of a match. The iron answers with a quiet that feels like gratitude. The stair will carry boots without a whisper when night comes. The service chest yields a square of lint and a bottle of clock oil. One breath upon the carriage bearings. A drop set where brass meets brass and, once only, civility. The lens turns by fingertip with the mild pride of a well-kept instrument. I pour soft water into the basin and stir a spoon of whiting. Prisms love the slow circles. Salt bloom vanishes and leaves a glass that keeps no memory of sea breath. Sunlight gathers into pale rainbows along the inner ring and then fades. On the oak the tide curves stand like calm handwriting. The arrow for the tender remains at the half. Swell still long from the northwest. Derrick sheave greased by thumb and cloth. Slings looped and laid so a cold hand can trust them without thinking. Barometer holds to its new figure. Needle tapped. And written, wind breathed east by north. Haze on the lower rim where banks sometimes sow their gauze. Horn readiness kept in muscle and in reach rather than in talk. I turn the alidate to 3 inshore marks I know as well as faces. The cliff, notch the white gable inland, the low reef that writes foam when the tide turns. Bearings checked and set down on the card that waits for weather days when sight shortens. The bell frame takes its share of care, a square of sandcloth where paint lifted. A little red lead from the tins the tender left in autumn. The iron wears its new coat like a sober promise. The clapper wrapped again, so metal will keep its temper. Mackerel breath carries across the water in the shape of schedules and hulls. Royal Mail packets holding their times as if they were laws. New liners fitting polished brass and carpets while riveters still warm the seams. Ice lists signaled by call sign from Cape stations. Here that world becomes a horn key, waiting under a cloth and a lamp wick trimmed to a quiet crown. I fold the circular from the service that speaks of berk reports far out on the banks. I lay it beneath the shell so the message sits with tide and weather and becomes part of the day instead of a rumor that claws. In the galley, the kettle puts up its small engine. Tea steadies the hands. A biscuit warmed against the lid breaks. With a sigh, the room smells of rope pitch and paraffin and stone drying after spray. A house made by crafts rather than by streets. The second's watch is set against the regulator card and wound to the same soft firmness I prefer at dusk. Tiny clicks like a cricket behind a wall. Time made companionable by honest gears. I take the spyglass to the lee pane and find a trap. Steamer trimming her smoke against the wind. Stack low, bow shouldering the swell with patience. I set her angle upon the scratched arcs. West by south and steady. A neat mark goes into the margin with the hour. The cistern gives water with a good spine. Bucket filled and set upon the third tread. Lens cloths rinsed and wrung. Chamois folded into its tin. A small order that carries into night like a tune. Remembered, cloud gathers as a quiet bank along the south. Not bold, only the cloth that fog wears when it rehearses. I pass a finger along the horn key and feel its threads greased and willing. The tank under the cover holds a shore warmth. The bleed open for breath and closed. Readiness confirmed. By touch rather than noise, I polish the service ring until the brass holds a soft dawn, even though the sun has gone thin. Fingerprints vanish. The room looks like a bridge at sea when the watch is sober, and the world large, the weight on its chain stands calm. I test the pawl with a measured turn. The drum replies with a single click, and an ease that promises a clean night. The governor fan, still as a folded hand, waits for dusk to set it counting. A gull lands upon the belframe and regards me with the expression a keeper knows. Neither ceremony nor alarm, only the matter of a day settled into its long breath. The bird lifts on a gust and folds into the bright seam between reef and swell. I lay 2 fresh wicks upon the service tray and cut their shoulders to the curve learned in winter. The trimmer edge keen as a hemline, the pricker set by its tin, the funnel lip wiped until it shows a pale sky inside itself. Macro threads tangle into a sense of year as the mind idles. Postcards written on warm decks to towns these beams will never touch. Cargo tallied in ledgers aboard ships that pass as small lamps at our horizon. Wireless keys ticking behind closed doors where coffee cools. The tower holds its answer in a single vocabulary. Lean glass, true flame, measured turn, faithful horn. I walk the gallery and feel frost hiding in the shadow of the inner rail. Chalk upon the post asks for palm to iron and mind to step after dark. Kindness can be written in 3 words when placed where a boot will see it. Down the stair I bring the stove to a low blue and brush its skin with black lead. Iron shines in a way that does not brag. The kettle goes back to its corner like a cat that knows the routine. A mug waits upon the notch carved by other mugs and other winters. The spyglass rests. The second's watch breathes. The log stands open to the space where dusk will put its first necessary line. Lamp established at this exact minute. Rotation true. Oil to mark. Horn as required. No more and no less. Now the light begins to thin over. The sea, color drains from the kelp beds until they look like old rope laid under green water. The headland leans into evening the way a shoulder leans into a well-remembered harness. I climb to the lantern and lay my palm on the brass door until its chill becomes familiar. The wick is set, the lens is clear. The fan will take its gentle dance. And when the hour comes, the lamp will bloom as it always does, slow and sure. One match, one breath, one quiet crown. The beam will start its hymn across the lanes, and ships I will never meet will read our character with relief. and the night will take its pace from this room, measured and kind, while I move through the small acts that hold the whole together. By calm inches, dusk gives itself to the lantern room in slow layers. The wick lifts to its work and takes the match without fuss. A round heart of flame grows to the quiet crown I trust. The prisms gather it and hand it outward as measured sheets that walk the horizon without haste. I wind the drum until the chain kisses its stop. The governor fan begins its modest dance. The carriage glides a tooth and then another. The lens turns like a hymn learned by patient breath. The beam finds its pace and keeps it. On the gallery the air tastes of rope, tar, and cold salt. Spray climbs as a fine dust and settles on the rail. I wipe the inner ring where warmth draws a pale circle. Glass clears to crystal, and the flame shines with a kindness that needs no name. The log takes its first night line. Light established at the minute promised. Rotation true. Barometer holding low by a hair. Haze to south kept in mind. Horn ready by hand and habit. Remarks plain for any keeper who climbs these steps after me. The spyglass brings a westbound packet near. 3 funnels like chimneys on a tidy street. Her lamps carried true. Her wake a chalk line drawn under our beam. Somewhere on her warm deck someone writes a postcard about a lighthouse that turned through the evening like a clock in a glass room. I set her bearing against the arcs scratched into the sill. West by south with the swell under her quarter. The pencil makes a small mark that reads more like gratitude than numbers. Wind veers a breath toward east. The aneroid needle answers with a cautious lean. I tap the glass and write the figure. A little drift of fog may climb the headland after midnight. The horn key rests, with its threads greased. The bell frame keeps its iron piece. Macro breath spreads across the sea lanes. Wireless spark carries ice lists from Cape stations to bridges that never sleep. Shipyards in Belfast and on the Tyne lay down ribs like cathedrals. Agents sell spring passages to families with trunks and Sunday coats. Our answer remains a single flame kept honest by cloth and oil and time. I dress the trimmer edge on the stone and return it to the tray. Pricker sharp. Funnel lip wiped until it holds a thin light. Spare wicks counted in their waxed wraps. A float pin folded in paper against rust. Calm readiness nested inside simple things. The horn plant gets a breath to prove itself. One long note walks the headland and comes back through stone like a slow drumbeat in the ribs. The valve key returns to its peg wrapped against salt. The tank holds its mild warmth like a kettle that prefers to wait. The beam lays a pale road. Over the kelp beds, cormorants stand black on the skerries with wings half open. The sea lifts and lays as if turning a thought. I count the revolution by ear and find the numbers living exactly where the card says they should. A trawler to the east shows 2 deck lamps and a shy red breath at her funnel. Nets come up like wet handwriting. Men move as dark knots of motion. I set their bearing in the margin so the night's small traffic feels seen and kept. The gallery steps wear a silver dust where frost returns before full dark. Chalk on the post reminds the next boots to lay a palm on the rail and let weight move like sense rather than hurry. 3 words can be a hand on a shoulder when placed where eyes will find them. And the galley, the little stove, holds a thread of blue. Tea moves into the tin mug and eases the chest. A biscuit warmed against the lid carries the day's last sweetness. The cup leaves a ring that the cloth removes with a single slow circle. Order gathers itself again and asks for nothing. More, I pass a finger along each bearing of the carriage. Clock oil places a kindness where brass meets brass. The lens answers by turning under a feather touch. The whole machine feels like breath arranged into metal. The prismatic faces receive a soft spiral of whiting where a salt ghost tries to linger. Glass clears until star and wick and my hat brim stand inside each other like coins. The beam resumes its duty as if time itself had asked. Macro notes travel through the night in their own language. Call signs at Cape Race speaking of bergs far out on the banks. Liners on proving runs with carpets still smelling of wool and polish. Parcels of mail wrapped in twine under stamps that name cities I will not see. I write none of that here. Only the line that says light maintained and rotation true and horn as required. The drum murmurs as links give and ease. I wind until the weight kisses its stop. The governor nods content. Oil rises in the narrow feed like a good thought finding its place. The flame holds a round heart and a low crown that wastes nothing and helps everything. I step to the lee pane and sweep the horizon. The westbound track keeps its quiet procession. A freighter low in the water, with her bow shouldering the swell. A cutter snug in our lee, with one lamp at the foremast. Each of them makes their way, as if our light were a firm hand on the tiller. Wind brings a thin veil from the south. Not heavy, only wool pulled over the brow of the headland. I test the horn once and let the note travel. Then I listen to the cliff answer with a long hum that fades into kelp and stone. The bell remains a dream and iron for weather of another sort. The seconds watch in my vest clicks with the soft pride of honest years. I set it against a regulator card and find agreement that feels like a quiet handshake. Time made companionable. My care becomes easier to breathe beside. A hinge at the upper landing that once asked for attention now moves as if born to be silent. A thumb of tallow keeps its promise. A stair carries weight with no more sound than cloth on stone. I lay 2 fresh wicks upon the tray and cut their shoulders to the curve that lights clean and lasts long. Edges smoothed like the keel of a small boat. The soft rag folded to a neat square waits for the hour when glass will again want kindness. The spyglass rests against the brass of the lee pane. A mail steamer shows 3 stacked lamps and a wake that writes itself bright under our beam. She passes with the assurance of a house that knows every room. Our pulse follows her until she leaves the arc and becomes only a low star on the water. The tide curves for morning lie open. Flood strong at first light. Tender advised for the half again. I pencil the same arrow I drew at noon. Patience is safer than boldness where swell meets granite. Stores can wait. A light that misses no beat is the only cargo that must always land. The night deepens by shades rather than by hours. The lens draws warmth into a thin ring that my cloth clears to crystal. The drum gives a bead and rests. The fan keeps counting. Surf speaks in long sentences and then begins the same story again. The tower leans like a tree that has learned every wind and fears none. A far horn answers to the south as another station tests its breath. The sound arrives like an old friend's name and then is gone. I mark the hour and the bearing in the log. The page grows rich without growing busy, each line a quiet tool for a tired mind. Tea returns to the mug and to the ribs the stove blue nods. The smell of paraffin and rope, pitch, and salt makes a room that feels like a harbor. Hands find their strength again by simple means, and the work stays gentle. Macro breath will keep its size beyond our horizon. Hulls slid from stocks into newspaper columns. Wireless messages flitting like birds above cold water. Ticket clerks closing ledgers under gaslight ashore. Here the lamp breathes, the lens turns, the horn speaks when asked, and the book holds what matters. I wind the drum a last time before the small hours. Chain kisses its stop. The fan's little vein keeps. Faith. The flame's crown sits low and even. Oil level marked to the pencil line I have trusted through seasons that change the faces of ships, but not the craft of this room. Outside, a lattice of frost finds the windward sill. I wipe the lee pane where breath made a circle. Stars show, as small steady nails in a board of slate. The beam lays its pale step across the swell, and every step falls where it should. I sit on the stool by the door with the mug on the notch worn by others. The seconds watch clicks like a cricket in summer grass. The chain murmurs, the prism faces breathe, the horn waits, the bell sleeps. The tower keeps its own weather where kindness is made from cloth and oil and measured turns. The hours move forward by calm inches, and somewhere out on the straight lines of the world, a steamer writes our light into her night book and goes on more certain for it, while I rise again to make the next small round and give the glass its gentle circle and the wick its quiet touch, and let the beam continue its hymn across the lanes without hurry or end. Small hours gather in a quiet fold around the lantern room. The beam walks its pledged circle, while the chain gives a soft word each time the drum yields a tooth. Frost smokes along the windward pane like breath upon glass and clears where the cloth has passed. I take the service door and trim a thread no thicker than a hair from the wick crown. Char falls to the tin with the sound of a moth's wing. Oil rises in the narrow feed, as if memory itself were drawing it. The flame sits round and low with a calm heart that wastes nothing. The lens faces receive a spiral of chamois and return to crystal. Prisms catch a faint star and hand it across the circle until it becomes a stead fan upon the water. The governor fan nods like someone counting knit stitches. The carriage moves a single tooth and rests. On the gallery the iron. Rail prints a pale oval in the palm. Frost has settled in a fine nap along the inner curve. Boots listen for the tread before they trust it. The headland makes its slow lean into the wind and then stands as if nothing had passed. The horn tank asks for a hand laid upon its skin, warmth sure and even. The bleed open for a breath and seated with threads that feel oiled and courteous. The key returns to its peg wrapped against salt, so a sleepy wrist will not fight it. A skein of fog rises from the south like wool teased from a carder. Not thick yet. A veil that dims only the farther reef. I draw one long note that crosses the cliff and comes back through stone, like a slow drum heard in another room. The bell frame below keeps its iron silence. The aneroid needle sits one hair lower than the hour before. I tap the glass with the back of a knuckle and write the figure. Wind veering a shade, air thick along the lower rim. Horn as required, and Lamp maintained noted, in the log with a hand that neither decorates nor delays. Macro breath keeps to its distant work. Ice lists sent by call sign along the banks. Liners making time with carpets, still smelling of wool and polish. Emigrant trunks, stowed under bunks beside enamel mugs and lunch tins. Our answer continues as a single bean kept clean and a horn that speaks in the right voice. And no more, I lift the oil can and place a drop on each carriage pivot. Brass receives it with gratitude that feels like smoothness rather than show. The lens turns under a fingertip with the ease of a boat at slack water. I wind the drum until the chain kisses its stop and the fan settles into its true measure. The spyglass draws a freighter to the west. Stack trimmed. Bridge lamps steady. She wears the beam like a guard set at her shoulder. I lay her angle on the scratched arcs and note west by south with swell under her quarter. A small mark placed for a mine that may be tired later. Below, the galley stove holds a thread of blue. Tea climbs into the tin mug and steadies the ribs. A heel of bread, warmed against the lid, returns a quiet sweetness. The cup leaves a ring the cloth removes with one slow circle. Order settles into wood. And skin I dress the trimming blade with 2 patient passes on the stone. The edge returns to straight. The pricker sits in its outline beside the spare wick, folded in waxed paper. The funnel lip is wiped until it holds a small moon within its metal. The service door closes with a hinge that now remembers its manners. A thumb of tallow at dusk has kept its promise. The stair carries weight without a word. Chalk on the post still asks for palm to iron when frost hides on the upper tread. Fog thickens just enough to turn distance into cotton. I send the horn once at the top of the sweep and count by the regulator so the note falls where it helps, rather than startles. The bean stitches through the veil and writes a pale road on water that rises to meet it. A cutter to the east shows. A single lamp like an orange bead. She holds her water beneath our lee, with ropes quiet upon their pins. Nets stacked like folded cloth. A man lifts a mug and then returns to his coil. The sea keeps its old grammar, and the tower replies with the same quiet verb to keep. The bell rope hangs with its tail a hand's breadth above the floor. Damp cannot climb. Fibers sleep straight. I touch the coil the way one checks the pulse of a friend. All is well. No need to wake iron from its bed. Macro threads thrum across the lanes. Wireless spark traveling in bright thought between cape. Stations and bridges. A name spoken in every parlor when talk turns to new hulls and longer decks and pride in speed. Such size belongs to newspapers and city windows. Here the scale fits a hand to a wick and an ear to a fan and a pencil to a plain page. I step to the lee pane and lift the cloth where warmth has drawn a ring. Glass clears until star and crown and my cap brim stand inside each other like coins. The carriage moves its tooth. The drum gives a bead and rests. The tower breathes like a living thing that trusts its keeper. The horn key sits where the hand can find it without searching. The tank chuckles once as if answering a private joke. I seat the bleed and lay the cover back. Readiness is a posture made of simple acts, repeated without drama. Toward false dawn, the fog slackens and drifts. The wind tastes cleaner. The aneroid holds to its number as if choosing patience. I wind the drum to the kiss again and feel the chain speak a soft syllable up through the boot. The fan keeps count. Like a low song, I make a small tally of paraffin drawn and of wick trimmed lean over the past week. Economy sits beside sufficiency like two chairs at the same table. The light has never missed its hour. The book shows lines that read like the bones of such a promise. A last sweep with the spyglass shows only the slow procession of westbound lights sinking toward the curve of the world. Each of them will write our character and move on with a steadier heart. That is the whole of the trade, and enough. The kettle gives its modest cloud. I pour and leave the mug upon the notch worn by others. I sit one breath with the tower, and but its sounds arrange themselves. Oil whisper, chain murmur, glass hymn, horn asleep for the moment. Sea telling the same patient tale beneath the skerries. False dawn lifts as a pewter seam above the horizon. The beam keeps its stride without asking for applause. When day gathers enough shape to guide a hand on a wheel, I will lower the flame. By gentle turns and let the lens complete its last circle. Until then, I make another round with the cloth and the small blade and the pencil, and carry the night the short distance that remains, one quiet act at a time. False dawn climbs another finger's breadth along the rim. The beam keeps its measured stride, and the tower breathes in time. The chain gives a soft syllable where the drum yields a tooth and rests. I lift the service door with 2 fingers. A feather touched to the wick crown. A thin curl of char slips into the tin. Oil rises in the narrow feed, like a thought recalled. The flame rounds and holds a low, frugal heart that wastes nothing. The chamois makes a slow spiral along the inner ring. Warmth leaves a pale circle that clears to crystal. Prisms gather the lamp and lay it outward as orderly sheets. The governor fan nods as if counting knit stitches. The carriage steps a tooth and everything returns to hush. Fog is loosened and drifts in pale rags along the south. The horn key waits under its cloth. I open the bleed of breath and seat it true. The tank keeps a tempered warmth. Readiness is a posture made of simple acts that answer without drama. A westbound steamer shows 3 lamps in a tidy row. The spyglass draws her near until the wake looks like chalk pulled beneath our beam. I set her angle against the arcs scratched. Into the sill, west by south with the swell under her quarter. A neat mark goes to the margin, and no more is needed. The aneroid needle holds to its new thought. I tap the glass with the back of a knuckle and write the figure. Wind veering a hair toward east. Visibility fair to west and soft along the banks. Horn is required as the only sentence that matters if white weather returns. Below, the galley keeps its thread of blue. Tea lifts into the tin cup and sets warmth behind the ribs. A heel of bread warmed against the lid returns a quiet sweetness. The ring it leaves upon the oak goes away under a single slow circle of cloth. I dress the trimming blade with 2 passes on the stone. The edge becomes straight as a hymnal line. The pricker sits where a fingertip finds it without search. The funnel lip is wiped until it holds a small moon in its metal. The service tray shows each tool in outline. A language of order learned by winters and kept for nights that ask more than memory. Cloth folded. Wicks counted in their waxed wraps. Float pin folded in paper against rust and damp. Macro breath moves in far rooms where charts are spread and tickets stamped. Cape Station send ice lists by call sign. Shipyards fit brass while hulls still smell of paint. Emigrant trunks wait under bunks beside enamel mugs and folded shawls. Here that weather becomes a clean lens and a flame set to. A covenant of arcs and seconds, I wind the drum until the chain kisses its stop. Links speak like beads. The weight settles to its long fall. The fan breath keeps to its card. Time agrees with thumb and with ear, and becomes easier to breathe beside. The bell frame below keeps its iron peace. A gull leaves the skerry and folds into the seam where reef water slips green under the beam. I note the tide line along the outer weed. Flood will run strong at first color. The tender will want the half if swell keeps its shoulder. The gallery rail prints a pale oval in the palm. Frost returns in the shadow of the inner curve. Chalk on the post asks for hand to iron, and no haste upon the upper tread. Kindness fits. Into 3 words when placed where boots will see them, I polish the service ring until brass holds a quiet dawn inside itself. Fingerprints vanish. The room looks like a bridge that keeps good order without calling attention to its pride. The lens turns under a feathered touch. The whole machine feels like breath arranged into metal. A cutter under our lee shows one lamp at the foremast. Men move as dark knots among coiled rope, and mug lifts and returns. Nets lie like folded cloth. Their deck is the size of a kitchen. Floor in their ocean is the same as every liner's. Our beam belongs to both without favor. Light gathers along the east, like pewter poured thin. I lower the crown by slow turns. The flame obeys without sulk. The lens completes its promised sweep. The snuffer comes down and the wick answers with a small ember that fades to nothing. Glass raised a finger for breath. Prisms mist and clear. The carriage rests. The fan comes to stillness. The drum stands easy on its chain. Oil is noted to the line in the book. Paraffin tins checked by heft and mark. Wicks tallied. The funnel lip wiped honest. The tin of lint closed against spray. The service door eased home with a hinge that now remembers its manners. On the gallery the first color shows in narrow seams between sea and cloud. Surf lays white hands upon the outer reef and draws them back again. The bell rope hangs a hand's breadth from the floor so damp cannot climb. The horn key returns to its peg wrapped against salt. Barometer written in round figures. Wind east. By north with a kelp taste. Haze to south like wool teased thin. I had a clear line for the day watch. Fog possible on the turn. Horn to be kept near in hand. Words that fit on a single breath and keep another person safe. I open the day shutter where spray likes to creep along a seam. A strip of felt I set yesterday drinks the drip before it thinks of glass. Small guards save large labors. The lens stands clean as a vow. Sun, when it finds us, will turn the inner ring to quiet rainbows. The tide curves spread like stitched cloth on the oak. An arrow for the tender at the half. Derrick sheaves greased and slings laid true. If the sea smiles, we will take what is sent. If it frowns, we will keep our own company, and the light will not know the difference. Macro notes from the packet under the shell paperweight speak of signals, of drills, of a spare float pin rooted from the depot, of bark bits seen by fishermen, who read water the way a surgeon reads pulse. I fold the circular and lay it beneath tide and weather, so rumor becomes part of order. The cistern room smells of stone and iron. Stopcock tested and returned. Hose inspected where cloth binding. guards the bend. The pump handle draws with a good spine. A bucket set upon the third tread waits for claws, and for the small scrub the stove will ask. I touch the regulator fan and feel clean balance under the fingers. Pivots free, no grit. At dusk, the vanes will begin their modest counting again. Now they rest like a quiet instrument in its case. Sun comes shy through a ragged rent over the offshore bank. The headland steps into its own outline. The tower throws a shadow upon its own galleries. I take the spyglass to the lee pane and sweep the westbound track, a coal trail far out. A cutter snug in our shoulder, nothing in a hurry, everything. In its lane, the log receives the morning lines in a tidy hand, lamp extinguished at the exact seam of light. Rotation to rest, oil to mark, horn proved in the night and quiet by dawn. Visibility fair to west. Remarks brief enough that a tired eye will trust them. I lay the chamois in its tin, fold the soft rag on the hook, set the stool where a boot will want it when dusk returns. The seconds watch against the card, a pencil laid like a mast beside. The book, the room returns to the long patience of day. Macro breath will go on outside these stones. Hulls launched and named under bunting. Wireless sparks crossing miles that never learned to look crowded. Trunks carried to cabins where postcards will be written about small rocks and steady lights. Here the craft remains, what it was yesterday and will be tomorrow. Wick and cloth and oil and time. A beam written in water for strangers I will never meet. I carry the mug to the door and let the first mild air of morning find the rim. The sea lifts and lays, gulls scold the day awake. The bell frame wears its sober red and keeps its peace. I set the mug on the notch worn by other mugs and breathe with the tower while the hours slip toward noon. The tender, perhaps, the whiting for glass, the sandcloth for the bell bracket, the small errands that prepare the next dusk, and all of it moving by careful inches in the company of stone and brass, and the even heart of a light that will bloom again when evening asks. By late morning, the swell eases its shoulder, and the headland breathes a slower rhythm. The arrow on the tide curve reaches toward the half, and I step to the derrick head with a rag over my palm. Sheave turns free, hook greased with tallow. Slings, laid so a cold hand will not fumble when the boat noses in under the lee. The tender shows as a low hull shouldering green water. Her oars lift and set like measured handwriting. A boat hook bites the ring at the landing. Voices drift up as a friendly murmur that belongs to work and not to talk. We take the line and make it fast. The derrick takes the weight with a quiet hinge of rope and iron. 2 paraffin tins rise from the boat and swing across the spray in a slow arc. I guide them with a steadying hand upon the tagline. Metal touches stone as if it remembered the place. A crate of wicks comes next. Waxed wraps inside like folded letters. Then a small tin of red lead and a bundle of sandcloth. The hook finds the sling each time without search. The wind holds its breath, and the sea gives us room for these few careful minutes. I chalk each item on the slate as it crosses the sill. Tins tallied by heft and by stamp. Wicks counted in their bundling. Rope coils paid out and coiled up again. The boat slides back a hand's length and waits for the swell to speak before trying the next rise. A bag of biscuits wrapped in oilcloth and a small paper with a friendly hand come last. A note from a keeper north of us about berk bits seen 3 leagues off by fishermen who know the water's smell. Another line about a service float pen on its way, with the next run, if weather holds, the derrick swings home. The hook rests. The ring is cleared and the line cast back with a soft shout. The boat pushes her bow out and falls away in the green shoulder of the flood. Oars take the water like calm breath. The tender stern prints a small wake that the kelp smooths at once. Back inside, tins wiped down and caps checked. Wicks stowed. Under the bench in their waxed paper, red lead placed beside the bell frame list. The slate gains a clean column, and the log receives a short line, stores landed at the safer window. Nothing wasted. All in good order, I take the little brush to the valve key threads and lay a smear of grease. The horn plant answers with a friendly chuckle under its cloth. The bell frame wears a sober stripe with a sandcloth spoke. A square of red lead seals the iron from the weather that hunts edges. Tea warms the chest. A biscuit breaks with a sigh. The mug sits on the notch worn by other mugs and other winters. The cloth lifts the ring with one slow circle, and the oak looks content. To hold its place in the world again, mackerel breath keeps its slow march beyond our rim, mail packets keeping time like clocks. Agents ashore counting trunks and berths while sheds in Belfast and on the Tyne dress steel with polish and pride. Ice lists tapped by Cape stations into the night air for bridges to read by lamplight. Here that weather turns into simple readiness. A horn key set within reach, a lens kept truthful, a lamp that will bloom at dusk without coaxing. The chamois returns to the inner ring where salt tried to write its name. Prisms clear to quiet rainbows. The service tray holds trimmer and pricker, and funnel lip wiped honest. Order stands ready like a deck at change of watch. I open the storage chest for the felt I keep for day shutters. A strip pinned along the seam where spray once crept. Tacks tapped with the back of the knife. Water chooses the felt and forgets glass. Tomorrow's polishing will cost fewer breaths. The bell rope hangs a hand's breadth from the floor. I lay the last turn smooth so damp cannot climb. A palm to the clapper cradle promises sleep until weather calls. The bracket screws get a half. Turn until wood and iron agree again. On the gallery the air carries a thin sweetness from kelp warmed by a shy sun. I walk the circle and check both storm cone lashings. The halyard sheave turns without complaint. The mast stays folded like a careful sentence kept for a later page. The alidade sits on the sill and confirms the inshore marks I keep close as names. The cliff notch, the white gable inland, the low tooth of reef that writes foam at the turn, bearings penciled into the card. So fog days ask no favors of memory. A sack of coal from the tender is split into tidy billets for the galley stove. Ash tin emptied and lid seated like a book closing. The blue thread of flame settles under the kettle. The stove skin takes a blush of black lead and returns a soft shine that does not brag. I rinse the lens cloths in a bucket set on the third. Tread, salt milk clouds the water and clears. Chamois wrung and laid in its tin. The soft rag dried across a rope so it will not learn damp. The lantern room is quiet as a held breath. The fan sleeps. The drum stands easy. The service door sits, with a hinge that now remembers its manners. I run a fingertip along the service ring and feel only smooth brass and the faint warmth day has left in glass. Macro notes wear a softer shape when the room holds this order. Ships crossing the beam after dusk will write our character in their night books and keep going with an easier heart. Wireless will throw ice positions through dark like stones skipped across water, and our horn will answer when wool climbs the cliff, not with drama, only with the right syllable at the right time. I fold the friendly letter and place it under the shell paperweight beside tide and weather. Company of a kind made of ink and habit. I mark a small star on the slate beside the float pin note, so I remember to look for it next time the derrick swings. The second's watch is wound and set against the card by the door. Tiny clicks sit behind the quiet like crickets under a hedge. The tower breathes its slow weather. Stone and brass and oil and water at peace with each other, the afternoon leans toward the seam where light thins. I sweep the lee pane with the feather whisk so salt grit will not meet the cloth later. A gull writes a white curve against the gray and lets it fade. The sea lifts and lays as if counting. In a language older than charts, I stack the empty crates, ready for the next tender, and chalk the tally on their slats. Rope ends coiled flat, slings hung from their hooks. The derrick head set to rest with the hook tucked into its leather pocket. Every tool where it should sleep until called, then I stand with the lantern and let my breath fall to its measure. Again. Dusk will ask for the same craft as every night. Wick and cloth and oil and time. A match struck once, a crown shaped low and even, the beam beginning its hymn across the lanes, and I will move through the small acts that hold the whole, calm inches at a time, leaving the world beyond the headland to its steel and its schedules, while this room keeps the ordinary mercy that ships read from miles away. By noon the swell gathers its shoulders and then eases. The arrow on the tide curve matches the hour we marked. I rig the derrick with slings laid smooth and a block greased with tallow. The rope runs over the sheave with a sound like soft cloth. The hook waits square to the sea. The tender shows her low hull from the lee with a clean bow and a deck that carries 2 casks of paraffin, a crate of lamp wicks, tins of whiting, a small keg of clock oil, a packet of red lead, and a canvas bag with bread and letters. We work in quiet rhythm, a boat hook steady, a hand raised. I heave in time with the lift between rocks. The sling takes the first cask. The winch turns by slow inches. Iron and hemp speak in low voices as the weight leaves the boat and comes gentle to stone. The cask settles on skids padded with sacking. Chalk marks are checked against the depot list. The driver smiles without speech, and the bowman coils a line into a neat figure 8. Rope remembers order when hands teach it well. A parcel of notices rides in a leather pouch. Ice reported by call sign over the banks. A reminder to keep horn plants ready when haze turns to wool. A line about a liner fitting out a priver whose length has put every harbor office into talk. These words arrive as weather in the room. I tuck them under the shell so they become part of the day rather than a thought that runs ahead. We take a small sack of coal for the galley stove and a box of tallow that will feed hinges and ladders through months yet to come. The hook lifts and lowers without scold. The derrick takes to work with calm shoulders. The tender leans outward and approves with a low engine beat. A last crate rises with care. spare glass chimneys swaddled in straw, a second float pin folded in paper, 2 spare mantles wrapped in waxed cloth. I set them on the oak beside the service tray as if placing eggs in a nest. The door closes against spray, and the tower breathes. Easier. We share a mug from the kettle while the boat sits in our lee. Stone passes warmth into wet hands, and it moves back out into rope and plank. The crew wave and fall away. The tender rides the gap and slides toward the west like a black fish with iron bones. I stow each thing to its shape. Tins with brass, caps turned home, wicks counted and set in waxed wraps, whiting sealed against damp, clock oil labeled in a small hand on cloth tape, red lead tucked with the brush and sandcloth near the bell frame. The derrick rope is coiled by lay running, end tied with a turn that even a sleepy morning will not forget. The hook rests on its bracket. The block gets a cloth to keep salt from sleeping inside. Macro breath circles just over the horizon. Packets that keep time like clocks. Immigrant berths sold to families who have never seen ocean light but know the names of ships. Wireless spark passing ice lists like birds from cape to bridge and back. Our answer is the same simple grammar, a clean lens, a lamp set to an honest crown, a horn that speaks exactly when asked. The barometer steadies. I write its figure in the wind and round numbers. Haze sits like a soft band along the south. The horn key stays near the fingers. Readiness is not a shape on the wall so much as a posture in the bones. I grease the governor pivots with a breath of oil and turn the fan between thumb and forefinger. Balance proves itself by silence. At dusk it will count like a metronome. Taught by weather and by years, the bell frame wears its new red with a dignity that does not ask to be noticed. The clapper sleeps in canvas, bolts tapped and settled. Paint brushed thin where salt ate at corners. A note in the book promises a top coat when the day warms. Prisms receive a basin of soft water and whiting. Slow circles lift what the sea. Writes without asking. Glass clears until daylight threads itself through every facet. The lens stands like a bright rib cage around a small and patient heart. The spyglass finds a coal carrier far west, a cutter folded under our shoulder. One. Gold drawn on the wind like a white chalk line that does not break. I set their bearings in the margin because a tidy page steadies the mind as surely as a well-stowed rope. Afternoon takes on the pewter shade that means another calm night if fog keeps polite. I clean the snuffer crown and lay the chamois in it. 10. The pricker sits where the hand will find it. Funnel mouth wiped until it shows a small moon inside its circle. The galley stove asks for a pinch of coal. Blue holds close and clean. Tea warms the chest. Bread breaks with a dry sigh, and a sliver of pork answers with a scent that belongs to stone rooms in winter. The cup leaves a faint ring the cloth removes as lightly as a tide taking back a lace. Of foam I check the cistern stopcock and the hose bound in cloth. Pump handle lifts and lowers with a good spine. A bucket sits on the third tread for lens cloths and for the small scrub that keeps iron honest. Macro notes settle into habit. Circulars under the shell. Tide curves folded at the half for tomorrow. A remark in the book that stores landed without incident and that red lead has been applied where paint lifted. A bearing for the westbound track at the hour the packets often show. Nothing in it loud, everything useful to tired eyes at midnight. Toward evening, I walk the gallery, rail cool under palm, frosting in the inner curve where shade lives. Chalk on the post reminds a boot to take the rail when night adds its glaze. Storm cones stay wrapped on their halyard. No signal today, only the promise to speak clearly when weather asks. The second's watch is set against the card by the door. Tiny, clicks like a cricket the room has decided to befriend. The drum stands easy, the weight settles, the fan waits, the lens gleams, the wick shoulders cut to the curve that lights clean and burns long. Dusk comes on like a tide without wind. The sea loses its blue and keeps its shape. I climb to the lantern and lay a hand on the brass door until its chill feels like a familiar greeting. The match breathes, the wick takes, the crown lifts to the height learned in winter. Prisms gather and the beam begins its hymn across the lanes. Slow and exact, I wind the drum to the kiss. The governor takes its modest dance. The carriage steps. A tooth and another. The light keeps its pledge to the horizon. Down in the rooms, the parcels from the tender sit in their places, like words already used in sentences that make sense. The horn plant rests under its cloth, and the key sits where the hand can find it without searching. Frost begins to gather, a silver nap along the inner rail. The gallery air tastes of rope pitch and cold salt. I listen for the first small change that means care is timely, not late. Macro breath continues its wide work beyond our stones. Tickets stamped ashore for spring crossings. A hull of river praised for being larger than any before. Ice sighted by men who know cold water from warm by smell alone. Here the answer remains a steady crown, a clean glass, a weight that falls in faithful beads, a horn that speaks plain and then yields to silence. I make the first night line in, the log with letters that do not hurry, light established at the minute promised, rotation true, barometer held, haze light to the south, horn as required. The page looks like a chart that a tired hand can trust at 2 in the morning. Then I stand a moment and breathe with the tower. Oil whispers in its narrow path. Chain murmurs. Glass sings under the cloth. The sea writes its long sentences on the skerries and begins them again. The beam walks the water with a patience that feels like prayer without words, and my work carries itself forward by quiet inches toward the next small act, and the next, while ships that will never know my name take comfort from this room's even heart and pass, steady and sure, into the night ahead. Night stretches smooth as cloth over the lanes. The beam keeps its hymn without hurry. The chain gives its small word when the drum yields a tooth. The governor keeps count like a calm heart that never forgets. I lean to the service table. The spare chimneys come from their straw with a soft whisper. Each lip wiped honest, each bell set back in its cradle, the funnel mouth polished until it holds a pale moon. Wicks trimmed to the curve that burns long and clean. The float pin folded again in paper, so rust will not think of it. On the gallery, the wind hangs in a steady thread. Frost gathers in the inner curve of the rail. A palm leaves an oval that fades as breath becomes air. Kelp sighs against the lower reef. The bell frame keeps its sober red and its iron silence. I wind the drum to the kiss. Links speak like beads. Weight granted its long fall. The fan nods and then steadies. The lens turns under a feather touch. Prisms drink the lamp and lay it outward as orderly sheets. A slow sweep with the spyglass finds a cutter tucked in our shoulder, one lamp at the foremast, a man bending to a coil, another taking heat from a tin under his chin. The deck a patch of light on dark water, their world no larger than a kitchen floor, and still it carries the same ocean that lifts palaces. The aneroid shows no new thought, needle holding where the hour set it. Haze to the south like wool teased thin. Horn key wrapped and ready. Single breath on the threads, and the key returns to its peg the way a tool returns to a hand's outline. In the galley the blue thread of flame keeps to itself. Tea climbs to the tin cup and steadies the ribs. Bread warmed on the lid gives a quiet sweetness. The ring it leaves on the oak goes away beneath a slow circle of cloth. The room smells of rope pitch and paraffin and stone beginning to dry. Macro breath passes along the lanes beyond sight. Call signs sending ice lists to bridges that never sleep. Shipyards upriver fitting brass and carpets while riveters finish their last seams. Agents selling spring berths to families with trunks and folded shawls. Our answer remains the same. Measured craft, clean glass, true flame, horn as required, and no more. I check the lantern pedestal, where brass meets brass. A breath of oil with the smallest brush. Dust lifted by a sable tip. The carriage moves as if thought alone encouraged. It, the whisper that bearings make when they are pleased, returns to the room. The day shudder felt takes a finger along its seam. No drip working on mischief. The panes keep their dry edge. The inner ring warms and mists and clears. Chamois passes. Like patience, and the light becomes a cathedral window again. A freighter low on her marks slides across the westbound track. Stack trimmed, lamps carried honest. The wake a chalk line under our beam. I set her angle upon the arcs, scratched long. I go into the sill, west by south with swell under her quarter. A single neat mark for a tired reader at dawn. I draw the log nearer. Flame maintained. Rotation true. Barometer steady by a hair. Haze light to the south and harmless. Remarks plain and short, so the page reads like a path, even when the mind is full of weather. At the horn plant, the tank keeps its tempered warmth. The bleed open for a breath. Shut home clean. Valve key wrapped again against salt. Readiness is posture rather than talk. A room that answers like a well-taught crew. The tower leans a patient inch and then stands as if nothing had asked it to move. Granite courses hold their hymn. Iron ladder remembers every boot that taught it courtesy with tallow and time. The gallery picks up a faint silver where frost returns. Chalk on the post repeats the same 3 words for hands that come after. Down at the oak table the tide curves lie like stitched linen. The arrow for the tender at the half waits without impatience. Tomorrow or the next day, as sea allows, stores stowed. Tins with brass caps turned home. Wicks counted. Whiting sealed. Clock oil labeled with a strip of cloth tape. The seconds watch clicks beside the regulator card. Tiny sounds like a friendly cricket. I set the hands to the mark that lives on the card. Time and ear shake hands and agree. The fan's little vein keeps that agreement as a promise to the lanes. Macro threads come ashore as thin letters in a packet. A keeper north reports bark bits in waters fishermen smell as winter long after charts say spring. Another writes of a beam seen 40 miles off when air went clear as glass. I lay their lines under the shell so news becomes part of order and not a weight on thought. I pass the cloth along each facet until hat, brim, and wick crown and the faintest star stand nested together. The lens turns and makes a law out of light. The chain murmurs one more syllable. The lamp breath is steady and small and kind. A gull rides the lee and scolds without malice. A seal's head writes a black comma in the channel and then sinks. The sea keeps its patience. The tower keeps its even heart. The beam walks and never hurries. The horn gives one long syllable into a weather that asks for courtesy, not noise. The cliff returns a soft answer. The note falls into kelp and becomes part of the reef's old grammar. I mark the hour and bearing and set the key back so a sleepy hand will find it like a spoon in a well-kept drawer. Coal for the stove rests in a sack by the step. 2 pieces enough to keep blue close and clean. The kettle breathes. The mug warms the fingers. A biscuit folded in cloth keeps its comfort. Small provisions make long watches gentle. The book takes one more line without ornament. Light maintained, horn as required. Visibility fair to west, wind easy and even. A signature small and sure. Enough guidance to steady a stranger who opens. This page in a hard hour toward the turn before dawn, the fog lets go and thins to strands. Air tastes of iron and clean cold. Stars show like small nails hammered into slate. I wind the drum to the kiss. The governor nods and settles. The lens steps a tooth with the confidence of a clock that has found its day. When the seam between sea and sky begins to lift, I will lower the crown by careful turns and let the lamp retire with the same grace it woke. Prisms mist and clear. The carriage come to rest. The drums stand easy on its chain. The first color will find the panes, and the tower will drink it without moving. Until that seam appears, I make another quiet round, cloth to glass, oil to bearing, pencil to book, palm to rail, breath to the room's low chord, the beam continuing for ships I will never meet. The old rock giving its steady kindness to lanes that only ask for a true light, and a keeper who believes that such small mercy is enough. False dawn loosens its grip, and the seam of light climbs steady. I lower the crown by slow turns and let the lamp fold into ember. The snuffer comes down, and the wick gives a single fading breath. Glass raised for a finger of air. Prisms mist and clear. The carriage rests. The fan grows still. The drum stands easy on its chain, like a weight that has told its whole night's story. A basin of soft water waits on the stool, chamois wrung and folded. The inner ring takes small circles until the faint ghost the night laid down withdraws. Lens faces regain the clean that makes daylight look like quiet rain inside glass. The service door closes with a hinge that now remembers its manners. The room keeps a tempered hush. Oil is written to its line in a hand that does not hurry. Wicks counted inside their waxed wraps. Spare chimneys checked where straw kept them safe. The funnel lip wiped until it holds a small moon. The pricker returned to its outline. The float pin folded again, and paper against damp and time. On the gallery, a silver nap of frost thins along the inner rail. Palm to iron. Chalk on the post. Asks for no haste on the upper tread. Wind carries a thread of kelp and rope tar. Surf lays white hands on the outer reef and draws them back. The bell frame keeps its sober red, and its iron piece. The barometer shows its figure by a hair. I tap the glass and write the number plain. Wind east by north with a clean taste. Haze to the south like wool teased thin. Fog possible on the turn. Horn to be kept near in mind and hand. Words set where a tired eye can trust them. Tide curves lie smooth as folded linen on the oak. Arrow for the tender at the safer window noted again. Swell long from the northwest. Derrick slings coiled and laid, sheave dressed with tallow. Rope tells its own calm story when the palm reads the lay. A letter from the packet under the shell is folded once more and slid beneath tide and weather. Ice lists carried by call sign far out on the banks. New homes praised upriver. Postcards promised to strangers on warm decks. Here those winds become readiness and small acts repeated until they feel like breath. Galley blue rises under the kettle. Tea moves into the tin mug and sets warmth between ribs. Bread warmed against the lid gives its quiet sweetness. A sliver of pork leaves a scent that belongs to stone rooms in winter. The ring on the oak vanishes under a slow circle of cloth. Order restored where hands have lived long. I grease the little hinge that asked at midnight. Iron accepts the kindness and forgets its complaint. The stair will carry boots without a whisper. The day shutter felt takes a new tack where spray liked to creep. Small guards save large labors. The lens stands clean as a kept vow. The second's watch is set against the regulator card and laid by the door. Tiny clicks like a cricket in a warm wall. Time made friendly by honest gears. When dusk returns, we will agree again without argument. I sweep the gallery with the spyglass from the lee pane. Westbound track shows a coal trail drawn thin under a pale sky. A cutter folded in our shoulder carries one lamp and the discipline of tidy coils. I note their bearings in the margin because a tidy page steadies the mind like a well-stowed rope. Downstairs the tins stand with brass caps turned home. Clock oil labeled in a small hand on cloth tape. Whiting sealed. Red lead and brush wrapped. For the bell bracket when noon warms. The chest closes with the soft authority of order. The room looks like a bridge that kept a promise. The book receives the morning line. Lamp extinguished at the exact seam of light. Rotation to rest. Oil to mark. Horn proved in night watch. Visibility fair to west. Remarks brief and kind. Signature small and sure that allows another keeper to breathe. Macro breath passes beyond the headland. Schedules kept like laws. Trunks stacked for spring sailings. Wireless spark passing ice by call sign from cape to bridge. Shipyards lifting. Steel ribs that make newspapers speak in large words. Our reply remains a single craft. Clean glass, true flame, careful horn, steady hands. I shoulder the storm cloth and step to the gallery where color begins to write on the water. The tower throws its shadow upon its own galleries. Gulls argue, like old hinges, and then find their work. Seals breathe dark commas in the channels and vanish. The headland accepts the day without theater. The T-10 goes back to its place. Chamois folded into its tin. Wicks wrapped. Cloths rinsed in the bucket on the third tread. Stool set where a boot will want it when the first climb of evening begins. Nothing left loose to make thought stumble. I stand a moment with the tower and match its breath. Stone and brass and oil and glass agree in their quiet chorus. The beam sleeps now, but its promise does not. Lanes will ask again at dusk, and the answer will be the same. One match, one crown, one measured hymn written across water. I leave a note at the oak for the hand that relieves me after noon. Horn near at the turn, if haze grows wool. Bell frame, painted where salt bit. Tender safer at the half if swell keeps its shoulder. Words that fit into a breath and make a day walk straight. Then I take the stair with a palm on the cool iron. The service room holds its neat outlines. The lantern breathes the faint scent of clean paraffin. The sea turns its long shoulder and rests. The lighthouse keeps its ordinary mercy ready for the next night, and the next horizon, and the next ship that will write our light in its book and go on steadier for it, while I close the door softly and let daylight take the glass until evening asks again for the same careful craft, wick and cloth and oil and time, the same calm grammar that brings strangers home